Hello again, I am Blunty. Having a bit of a rough week, just emotionally and mentally. I mean, you know how it is. You got problems with your brain chemistry. Sometimes you just got to lie down and do nothing for an entire day. It's kind of what I did yesterday. Started watching the Star Wars movies, because we've got the new one coming out, the final part of the final trilogy of trilogies, the Skywalker saga, all that sort of stuff. Pretty excited for it. I mean, regardless of what your feelings are about the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and how you feel about how they've all been handled through the various kinds of, where they slotted in Star Wars history and, the production history, pre and post Disney and all that sort of stuff. It'll be nice to just finally have that bookended. Maybe then we can move on to some absolutely fresh stuff like Mandalorian. Have you been watching that? Amazing, beautiful. It's like a Kurosawa film and a spaghetti western, which is, where the roots of Star Wars are. I mean, George Lucas has always been very open about his inspiration for Star Wars, and, Kurosawa films and spaghetti westerns and all that sort of stuff are, the basis of where Star Wars grew out of in the first place. So it's nice to return to that roots and have it done so beautifully, so expertly, so passionately, so enthusiastically, so it is just one of the best things to ever happen to Star Wars, in my opinion. Mandalorian is fantastic. Anyway, so a new movie coming out. I've gone back, and the plan is to watch, the Skywalker trilogy from scratch. And I was going to sort of draw it out, but like I said, I took the day off yesterday, and I watched all three of the prequel trilogy just back to back to back, which was, you know what? I liked them a bit better than I remember liking. I haven't rewatched them in a while, probably a couple of years, and obviously greybeard here. I'm an OG Star Wars fan. It's, the original trilogy is the best trilogy, and of those, Empire is obviously the best, the one not actually directed by George Lucas, because as much as he's responsible for Star Wars, he's not really the best of ever executing his idea. Let's be honest. But I was actually surprised that the things that I remember really hating about the prequel trilogy, I didn't hate quite as much. I mean, Jar Jar's still annoying, all that kind of stuff. There's still some really stupid plot holes in there and stuff. And this morning, after watching all three movies yesterday, this morning I hopped online and I was Googling about, just double checking what some sort of fan explanations for certain aspects are and sort of filling in some lore holes and things like that. And I went, hang on a sec, why actually, with Order 66, why didn't they actually just go after Anakin? Was there would the troops with him not get that specific order? And when a troop who did get that order to kill the Jedi, when they came across Anakin, were like, oh, not Jedi anymore, Sith, obviously, don't kill that. And, there's a few theories around the order of which they got in and Operation Nightfall and things like that, if you want to dig really into the nerd lore of it. But in that process, and this is where we finally get to the point of this video, I came across an article that was like 5 days old now that somehow skipped right over my radar for whatever reason. I'm not looking at a lot of Star Wars stuff right now because with the new movie coming out, I don't want to get too many fan theories into my head about, if Rey is going to turn dark and what dark Rey actually means and what's going to happen with Kylo and who's going to survive it and all that kind of stuff and who really is the Skywalker in Rise of the Skywalker. And, I don't want too much of that in my head when I go to see the movie. So I've been avoiding general Star Wars content for a little while now, but I saw this article and it's about Kathleen Kennedy, the person responsible, the captain of the ship for Star Wars since Disney took over. And the Star Wars fandom love to hate her because she just pisses them off constantly. She's the target for the blame of everything that crappy has happened with Star Wars, or what people think is crappy, what they don't like about the new stuff that's been coming out since she was put at the captain head of the ship over at Disney. Because despite it being one of the biggest brands in the world, we all will have to direct our hate to one person, because directing it to a faceless corporation isn't nearly as fulfilling as spewing direct hate at a specific person who is, the figurehead. That's not to say hating her is unjustified, because let me read you a quote from the interview from Rolling Stone, I think it was. Rolling Stone interviewed her. She's doing the press rounds to pump up the new movie and things like that, I suppose. But let me read you an excerpt from the quote that it's like, oh, why? Just why? Every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. Kathleen Kennedy, head of Star Wars over at Disney, thinks there is no source material for Star Wars. We don't have comic books, she says. We don't have 800-page novels, she says. We don't have anything other than the passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next generation might be. We go through a really normal development process that everyone else does. You start by talking to filmmakers who you think exhibit the sensibilities that you're looking for. You know, the ones you originally hire before you fire them and replace them with another director to shoot the second half of the movie and do that little wonderful shuffle that you've been doing recently. Yeah, I'm sure you're really interested in supporting passionate directors with very specific visions. Yeah, that's why you pick them. And then when their vision no longer is going in the direction you want it to go, suddenly you swap them out for someone else because it's your vision you want, not theirs. Dickhead. So we try and be as thoughtful as we possibly can about making those choices. I would also argue that sometimes people get involved in the normal development process and then they realize, oh my God, this is so much more than I ever imagined. It's so pretty common when you're working in movies, you're not making choices or decisions that necessarily work out exactly the way you want from the get-go. Well, why don't you just let these people do their job that you hired them for instead of constantly interfering with them? How about that? But let's roll back to the no source material thing. This is the woman who has been at the head of Star Wars since didn't took over. So this is the woman that the final decision that they had to pass through on what happens with all the comic books and novels and you know animations and all that sort of stuff that she thinks doesn't exist. She knows for a fact they exist because she made the decision to ignore them when they turned them from expanded universe into legends. So they're no longer canon. She made the decision, and she said at the time something along the lines of, yeah, we're getting rid of all of this so our creative people can not feel leashed by the restrictions of what came before. So they have a clean slate. She wanted that clean slate. Now she's complaining about having a clean slate. It makes it too hard because she can't copy what someone else did. Someone more talented. Someone better at their job. Someone who understands Star Wars better than she does. She's complaining about the choice that she put herself into. By the way, even after she made that choice, the new canon stuff, there's plenty of that around. I got a few on my Kindle right here, just for example. I've got Star Wars New Dawn, which was it's pretty good. I've got Star Wars Thrawn, which I haven't actually finished reading. I need to go back to that. I started reading it, then got distracted by something else, probably a video game or something. Lords of the Sith, haven't read that, but it's sitting here waiting for me for my next plane trip, I guess. And Ahsoka, which was, it wasn't brilliantly written, but it was a really interesting story. So all of this, all of this doesn't exist as far as she is concerned, even though it is new canon. 30 years, 3 decades of content she chose to ignore and then complained about how it doesn't exist. I have to think at this point she is deliberately trolling Star Wars fans. I think she gets a sick thrill out of saying this stuff and doing this stuff and then watching them go apeshit online. I think she's a troll. She does this for sport, and there are plenty of people out there that do this. I mean, it's a really effective way to get attention these days. I mean, they say there's no such thing as bad publicity, and it's just not true. I mean, even in the context of Star Wars, just ask Ahmed Best whether or not there's such a thing as bad publicity. If you don't know who he is, he's the actor responsible for Jar Jar Binks, and he, like Kathleen, became the face for the target, even though his performance was written and directed by someone else. He got the blame for everything wrong with Jar Jar, and it was so much so that it kind of came close to ruining his life, sent him into a deep spiral of depression, and actually considered committing suicide. So much was the hate piled upon him for his portrayal of this character that George Lucas is actually responsible for. And the point of all this is, I haven't been particularly on board with the piling on Kathleen Kennedy. She's not the only person responsible for everything you don't like about modern Star Wars. She's just the captain of the ship. She's the figurehead. She is the target. She is the one you can point to and go, there. But at the same note, it's hard to come to her defense and say, hey, just a minute. Maybe there's some blame to be spread around a little more widely here for the things you don't like, and maybe there's a different way you can go about expressing your disappointment in the direction and experience of Star Wars in this day and age. But then she comes out and says shit like this. Then she comes out and says there is no source material for them to base anything off of anymore. Number one, yes, there is. Number two, you decided to pretend they don't exist. Number three, you could pretend they do exist again in a heartbeat. Just change your mind on that. It's easy enough. You go, well, that one right there, that's canon. We'll just make a movie out of that. Or, the final option is you can actually hire people with original ideas instead of kind of remaking, the original trilogy, but with different people, but having these exact same beats and notes go through the movie in the desperate hope that people will like it because it feels familiar, but won't attack you because it's insipid and uninspired. How about that? Oh wait, Mandalorian. I wonder how much Kathleen Kennedy had to do with Mandalorian. I gotta feel like not much. I gotta feel like Favreau has earned enough Hollywood cred at this point through his work in the MCU and you know, all that kind of stuff, that he gets to make some of his own decisions without the studio, you know, the grey suits jumping down his throat every 30 seconds. And of course, Dave Filoni, the other half of the core driving force behind The Mandalorian, has done some of the best Star Wars stuff ever in the animated stuff, the Clone Wars stuff and Rebels stuff. So when you get those two together and you leave them the frick alone, you get Mandalorian. And you get one of the best pieces of Star Wars stuff ever made in the entirety of the 40 years of the franchise. And guess what? That is drawing on the history of Star Wars, not only the original inspiration as far as the cinema goes, but also a lot of the lore of the Mandalorian stuff that has been thread throughout a lot of the stuff that doesn't exist, apparently. So yeah, I read that this morning and I just needed to rail. I'm sure this is not a fresh take because this news is about 5 days old, and I'm sure the channels around here on the YouTube who specialize in talking about Star Wars have probably ripped this thing to shreds already, but I needed to make a video this week, at least one, and I needed to get this off my chest. And I also wanted to reach out because I haven't actually read a lot of the Legends stuff, what used to be called Expanded Universe. I never read a lot of it. I read bits and pieces here and there, a few of the old novels, a couple of comic books and things like that, but I never dug right into it because I guess a lot of my spare time in those formative years was spent playing video games instead of reading and things like that. But I have been, like I said, reading a few of the newer canon stuff to sort of fill in some of the lore gaps and things like that, like A New Dawn and Thrawn in particular, to fill in sort of some of the stuff that was happening in the animated series and sort of get to grips with those characters a little bit better, and that's been quite a lot of fun. Same thing with Ahsoka. Ahsoka deals with what happened to Ahsoka sort of in between, when we most recently saw her and when she left Anakin Skywalker and just sort of did her own thing for a while. And as far as the story goes, it's really quite worth reading. It's not, like I said, it's not especially well written, especially when compared to, my favorite author, sort of Terry Pratchett, who's writing is so exquisite. It just breaks my heart and blows my mind and fills me with joy all at the same time. But yeah, as far as Ahsoka's story goes and her character goes and her path, it was very much worth the read. So if you're going to read some of this book stuff that Kathleen Kennedy doesn't believe exists, I don't know, start with that, I suppose. But what's your recommendation is where I'm going with this. I was going to say, I didn't read a lot of the Legend stuff, but what's your recommendation? What would you most like to see turned into a Mandalorian-type TV series, miniseries, or a movie, or a trilogy, or an animated series? What bit of the stuff that Kathleen Kennedy doesn't think exists would you most like to see adapted into a new format, into a new medium? Personally, the whole Mara Jade stuff, or going back all the way back to Bane. When are we going to see more Bane? The origins of the Sith, shit like that. Or you could do more of the, the what if stuff that they're doing with the MCU, that sort of stuff. I'm really excited to see that. I've always loved the what if comics, but what if they did that? What if they did the what ifs with Star Wars? Like, what if Vader didn't die? I know there's a comic book about that. He gets all white suit and stuff. Looks really ridiculous, but kind of cool at the same time. Or, what if Obi-Wan didn't win the fight? And Obi-Wan was dead on Mustafar? What then? What if Anakin's walking around with all his arms and legs? Or what if Qui-Gon didn't accidentally save Jar Jar Binks and Jar Jar Binks actually got smushed into a fine orange paste by that big droid transport thing that was cruising along the forest? That's the what if I want to see. What if Jar Jar Binks was a smear on the forest floor? Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and we'll catch you next time. No source material. No source material. No. Someone slap her. It's right across her stupid face. On the other hand, if she is doing this deliberately to troll, don't slap her. Don't give her any attention. Just ignore her. That's the only way to deal with the trolls. Get angry. Ignore her. Things get worse. Maybe she'll just go away.